sometimes to your design decisions as to where you put your data and where you don't, and where you sort of upfront and level stuff. But that's an important piece. Network security model, they have this explicit access control. So they have this thing called, they call them groups. Group should be equivalent in your mind to firewall, sort of a bounding firewall. And it's very easy to control and manipulate. This is something I want to focus on. EBS boot versus S3 boot. So this is historically, which is a little funny to talk about when you're talking about a service that's only been around, or an area of the industry that's only been around for about 3 years. But historically, everything in Amazon was, you had S3 boot for your AMI. What that meant is you would create an AMI, or you would select an AMI that lived in Amazon's S3 stores, which is their persistent object storage, it just lived there. And when you went through and configured your EC2 instance, you would select that AMI. When you hit go and you configured it, hit run, they would essentially copy that locally they would assign a virtual machine, they would copy that image locally, they would expand it and deploy it to the ephemeral disks on that machine, and it would run. Everything was fine, everything was great. Now, when you shut that machine down, it would wipe the local disks. Okay? So part of your natural reaction is, that's bad. I just lost everything, right? Well, again, going to their storage or their design approach, they would say, well, you shouldn't store anything locally. Those nodes should be stateless, right? Use the persistent storage mechanism they provide to do that. Well, there have been some issues with that, and probably 9 months ago, I may be off on that, they released the ability to boot from EBS, or the Elastic Box Store. So if you play anything with virtualization, or if you come to Denny's talk next, we'll talk about virtualization stuff more. This is essentially booting from SAN. So if you play with virtual server or anything like that, or VMware, you can actually have your VHDs live on a SAN, and you can actually boot from that. That's how this works. You boot from EBS. It's actually faster, believe it or not, than interacting with the local disk, because you don't have the local disk contention. It's persistent. You get a lot of goodness there. Now, this goes back to, so I wrote a blog post a while back about, the topic was, using the cloud doesn't mean you get to fire your architect. And it's actually quite the opposite. You still have to understand the platform you're using. There are pros and cons to using EBS. And it has to do more about where and how you want to scale. If you want a machine in the cloud because you want a single box that you can kick around and play with, EBS is a great option. You can shut it down, you don't lose your bits, because it still lives on the SAN, all that good stuff. The flip side is it's much harder to scale horizontally. So if you're building a website, or you're building webheads that you need to be able to scale horizontally, you need to be able to use some of that elastic nature, EBS is probably not your right option. You probably want to take the S3 approach, sort of take the pain up front of building an auto-configuring, basically a script-based configuring AMI, do that, and then when you need to horizontally scale using either your own tools or CloudWatch or BrightScale, they can simply say, we need a new webhead. It will spin it up, deploy your code, add it to the load balancer, and you're good. So it's really a use case decision. Now, even with EBS, though, if you actually terminate the node, they wipe your EBS volume. So be careful. You can shut it down, and when you shut it down, you stop being charged for, you don't get charged for compute time, you do get charged for storage time, which you would expect. But if you actually hit the terminate instance option, it goes away. So make sure you save that off. Tooling, talk briefly about this. It was originally very command line based. It had a lot of tools, very rich tooling set that was all command line based. And sort of a little difficult to get into. I love command line tools once I understand what I'm doing. Personally, it's a little difficult for me to sort of wrap my mind around where I'm actually going just by reading docs and command line tools. They've gotten better. This is a tool for interacting with storage. There's a bunch of them out there. A bunch of them. Cloudware Explorer is just one of them. You notice it's a little hard to see. It says root. It's got this weird path, images, 23 cm, blah, blah, blah. That's how they've basically created a folder structure that maps that they've derived based on the slashes I have in my key name. So they're giving you that path, and they filter the view based on that. Elastic Fox is a plugin that's available for Firefox. It's actually very commonly used. It's available or distributed by Amazon, so you get it the AWS website. It's available. It's oddly not available in the normal Firefox add-ons thing, so you actually have to go to the Amazon website to do so. There's another tool called Hybrid Fox, which is a port of this that works both against Amazon's platform as well as Eucalyptus, which is, if you're familiar with Eucalyptus at all, it's nice to know it. If you don't know what I just said, ask me afterwards. But it's nice because it does work against that Eucalyptus and Walrus. It's great, but very much information overload. I left the screen as it is by default on a very wide monitor. They've got so many columns here by default, it's very difficult to consume it all. But it works. It's very nice. This is their, when you go to spin up a new image and you sit, or a new instance, you say, here, show me the images available. This is the list you get to choose from, which I'm sure somebody knows what all of these are, but it's a little cryptic. It's a little cryptic to figure out what ViJ, yeah, it's messy. And I show you this because I want to show you what they've done actually very recently to make it better. So they came out with the AWS Management Console, which is simple. It's a website. And they keep getting better. They just, within the last, I want to say month, added S3 support here, which is huge. So you can actually browse your folder structure directly from a website. You don't have to pull up a third-party client, which is really nice. But this has come out, so you don't have to use any command line tools to get started. You can play around and kick the tires here. This is the same image catalog on the website as we were just looking at Elastic Fox. I don't know about you, but this is a lot more consumable. It's a lot easier to understand what it is you're getting, and you can filter through it. So let's walk through briefly the machine setup. I was going to do this live, but I've given enough of these talks to know that conference networks are always awful. I did one at Codemaster in January, and it was horrendous. So I basically have a collection of screenshots. You can trust me, maybe, that this works. We will show you the actual machine in a little bit. So you start off by coming to you basically run instances, which you walk through it, pick your image. I scrolled the list down to show you the Windows images that are available. What's important to note is while they have good Windows support, they do not have support yet for R2. So they were a little late, or slow in my mind, in getting 2008 support. But it's still specifically R1, so you do not get R2 yet. You can get 64-bit machines. You see these two down here. The difference is because of the hardware that they're deploying it on, you can only get 64-bit machines on those require larger instances. So you can't get them on the small instances, which means larger instance means more cents per hour that you're paying. I think they do the M1 large, which is order of 60, 80 cents an hour, something like that. So you can do the 32-bit ones you can do on the small instances. So those are more like 10 or 12 cents an hour. So I went through and chose one. So you choose an instance, go through, you pick how many you want, availability zone, instance type. So this list gets filtered. So the 1.7 gigahertz, that's how big it is. And they've got a whole catalog that describes all of the different sizes. They start with what they call a single EC2 compute instance, which is basically the equivalent of a 1.7 gigahertz machine with a certain amount of, just slightly under 2 gigs of RAM and a certain hard disk. And then every size beyond that basically doubles. So you can get some pretty massive scale machines. You can get multi-core, lots of RAM if you want it. Of course, the price doubles with the feature set.
The 1.7 is a gigabyte.
That's how much RAM you get, but it's also how much, and they slice up their processing units. So Windows is, or on the Azure side, this is one comparison point. They're pretty clear that you're getting, if they have a multi-core machine, when you choose an instance, you're getting a dedicated core. Amazon won't say that. They're saying you're getting the equivalent of an instance, or an EC2 compute unit, which is not necessarily a dedicated core.